All right, we're going to be learning about color theory this week, and I want you to write down everything that is underlined. We are going to be doing these are some notes on color theory, and this will be for a grade. So make sure you write down everything that is underlined and be sure to create all the charts that I ask you to create. So this is going to, you're going to write down a word, you'll write down the definition of that word or description, and then you'll create a chart, a picture image that goes along with the word.
All right, so we're going to be taking notes today in your sketchbook, and I want you to have fun with the way that you lay it out. Think of it as another artistic creative assignment. You don't have to, doesn't have to be boring. You can use colorful pens, markers. You can use sticky notes, draw arrows, make little bubbles, whatever you can think of to make your notes more fun and interesting.
All right, let's get started. So make sure you write down color theory. So everything that is underlined, we want to make sure we write it down. All right, one of the first things I want you to know about color is that purple is not a color on the color wheel. Okay, so you only need to write down what is underlined, and that's the very first line. But let me tell you why purple is not a color on the color wheel. And I'm not saying that purple isn't a color. Purple is absolutely a color, okay? But it's just not a color on the color wheel when we talk about color theory. So violet is the color that's on the color wheel, not purple. There is no P in Roy G. Biv. Okay, if you don't know what Roy G. Biv is, that's the colors of the rainbow when light is broken down through refractions, like through a prism, like a triangular prism. When the light is refracted down, it creates the colors of the rainbow. So red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. The Phoenician trading city of Tyre, which is now modern-day Lebanon, discovered the color purple from the cooking process of marine snails' mucus, and the color was called Tyrian purple, and only royalty could afford it. And so if you will notice, especially like in the Renaissance times, lots of rulers would wear purple, and it was because they were the only ones that could afford it. And in a lot of paintings, a lot of historical paintings, you'll see royalty wearing purple because they were the only ones that could afford it. So if you were to buy some Tyrian purple today, it would cost you $100,000 for just 1 ounce. All right, color has 3 qualities: hue, saturation, and value. And hue is that color's name, just like red, green, purple, pink. Um, so some colors have names, like pink has a name, and that is red and white added together. But not all colors have names, like white added to yellow. The paint store is going to have a name for it, but you and me at school, what we've learned, that doesn't have a name, right? It's just called light yellow. But some colors, when they're mixed with other colors, they have a name, like navy, maroon. Those colors all have a name. All right, so the next quality that a color can have is saturation. And you may have heard this word if you ever edit your photos on your phone. There's usually a saturation button, and it can dial the color to be brighter or more dull. And same thing with paint. You can make a color dull, but you can't make the color brighter. Usually the way that it comes in its purest form, so like the paint straight out of the tube, is going to be your most saturated color. The brightest. So kind of like when you get a brand new shirt, the brightest that color that shirt is ever going to be is straight from the store. And because the more you wash it over time, the color is going to fade and become more dull. That's the best way I can describe saturation. So when it's brand new, straight out of the tube, that is the brightest and most saturated it can be. And adding other things to it can cause it to become more dull. Value is the last quality that color can have, and this is how light or dark that hue can be. The easiest way to change the value of a hue is to add black or white, but it's not the only way. And we're going to learn about those other ways later. Okay, so let's talk about dominant and non-dominant colors. So remember, you're writing down everything that's underlined. So you're going to write down dominant colors. A little goes a long way. Use sparingly. For your non-dominant colors, these are going to take larger amounts. Okay, so your most dominant to least dominant colors. So your most dominant color is black, and followed by black will be blue, then red, then yellow, and last will be white. And we're only going to be using our primary colors with black and white for painting. All right, when it comes to color mixing, you really need to understand which colors are dominant, which ones are less dominant, because your less dominant colors, you're going to need to start with more of that color. So if you remember from the chart, we wrote down that red was more dominant than yellow. So when we want to make orange, we're going to need more yellow than red because red is more dominant. Your more dominant color requires less paint. And so to make violet, we're going to need to use red and blue. Red is the less dominant of the two colors, so therefore we need more red, less blue. When we go to make green, yellow is the less dominant of the two colors between yellow and blue, therefore we're going to need more yellow, less blue. When we're trying to make gray, if we need to make a very dark gray, we want to start with our darker color first. So we would actually want to start with black first and then add just a small amount of white. And then if we were trying to make a very, very light gray, we would want to start with the white first because it's going to be light gray is going to be closer to white than black. And then because black is such a dominant paint color, we want to add very, very, just like a small speck of black to make that light gray color that we would need. So make sure you write down all of this as it is all underlined.
So as an artist, it's really important to know your color schemes because you need to be able to choose the correct one for what you're trying to get across to your viewer or to express how you're feeling for the reason that you're creating the artwork. It should not be something you're just randomly picking, you close your eyes and draw out of a hat. It's something that you're being very, very thoughtful about. And so you never want your color selection to be random. You always want it to be extremely thoughtful and purposeful.
Primary colors. These are the colors that make all the other colors on the color wheel. They are red, blue, and yellow. And now is when you're going to want to get your paint supplies ready, and we're going to draw and paint a red circle and label it with an R. Going to draw another circle, paint it with our blue paint, and put a B under for blue. And then we will draw and paint a yellow circle and label it with the letter Y. But in your bag, there was a QR code to show you how to set up your palette and how to put the press and seal so that it fills in each of those little wells, folding it into the wells, and then just kind of scrunching it on the back so that to keep your palette clean. And then whenever we're done painting, it'll be really easy to clean up the palette. You'll just take off the press and seal. Do not take it off until the unit is done, okay? It can keep being used on top of over and over again. As the paint dries, you can put new paint on top of it, so don't throw away the press and seal. All right, we'll use that in a minute. On your water container, I recommend one like this if you happen to have one. I know Dollar Tree sells these sometimes at the beginning of the school year. But it has 3 compartments, which really allows you to very easily clean your brush because it allows you to clean your brush in compartment number 1, the biggest compartment. Compartment number 2, I have these labeled on the side. The second compartment is where I clean my brush second. And then compartment number 3 always has my clean water in it. It's really important to have clean water when you are painting. And make sure you've got all your paints nearby. And then we're ready to get started. All right, so you don't want to paint with a dry brush, so you do want to get it a little bit wet, and then you're going to kind of wipe it in your fingers. As you are painting, every time after you clean your brush, you do want to re-flatten or straighten your bristles as best you can. All right, those of you that might have this round, this is called a round brush.
and it comes to a point. So when you wet it, or after you wet it and you're going to clean it, you want to just gently pull it back to a point as best you can. You don't want the bristles all splayed out, okay? You want to always reshape it back to the way it is intended to be in its original state, which is pointed, or like this kind that is more square and flat. All right, we're not going to need our palette yet because we are painting with our primary colors, which is what I've given you. And all you're going to need to do is barely dip your brush in, just the very tip of your brush. And then we are going to very slowly and carefully paint it in. If you have too much water on your brush, your paint is going to get very watery. So you do want to make sure you can always do another layer and build it up, build up the color. If it was too watery, let that dry and then come back and paint another layer. So we don't want this to look pink, we definitely want it to look red. Okay, and then we're going to use our container of water. Hopefully you have at least 2 containers. 1 container is probably not going to be enough because it's going to get dirty really fast. So clean your brush. Make sure you're kind of gently scrubbing it at the bottom of your container. Don't just float it around in the water. It actually needs to rub on the bottom of the container. That's how it gets clean. And then you're going to do that in your second compartment if you have one. And then I just use the container to wipe off the extra water and then reshape it in my hands. I do want to get off most of that excess water before I go on to my next color because I don't want the brush to be too saturated with water. All right, always be sure to put your lids back on when you're not using that color in case if one gets knocked over and spilled. Or so it doesn't dry out. All right, so just barely dipping our brush in, getting a small chunk on the tip of our brush, and then painting in our blue circle. I have a couple of loose bristles and they keep kind of fuzzing out my edges, and that's okay. But just be aware that that might happen. And so if I just kind of rotate my brush, and you can rotate your paper while you're painting if that makes it easier. It's just because for demonstration purposes, I need it to stay going, staying one direction instead of rotating it around. All right, so I'm going to clean my brush. And then dry it off. Right, and then I'm gonna finish with my yellow, same thing. I'm just barely getting a little spot of yellow. I'm gonna try to stay away from the edges of this ink so that they don't mix.
So artworks that use primary colors always have this very fun feeling about them. They don't feel sad in any way. They just make the viewer, at least me, they always make me feel happy and excited and always enjoy looking at artworks with primary colors. This is an artwork by Roy Lichtenstein, and he is always using primary colors in his artworks. That is one of the ways I recognize, or us as viewers recognize that it's a Roy Lichtenstein artwork because it has tiny dots, but it also uses red, blue, and yellow and has this comic book feel about it. But in general, I would say, in my opinion, artworks that use primary colors always have a very happy feeling about them. You just can't really feel sad when you're looking at an artwork that uses primary colors.
Secondary colors. These are colors created from mixing 2 of our primaries together.
These are some artworks that use secondary colors as their color scheme, And for some reason, they all are about flowers or nature. I would say, in general, most of the artworks I've seen, or even photographs that I come across in which this is found, if you were to find secondary colors together, it would be through flowers or in a garden. And so, this is a really natural color scheme if you wanted to paint nature.
So I don't need very much at all. And if you remember our ratios, if we were making violet first, we know that from our dominant colors, we know that blue is more dominant than red, so we want to use our red first. And we need, if we're calling this one part, oh, this is going to be a lot of violet. I don't probably need all of that. Okay, so apparently my video stopped videoing when I started mixing the violet, and I just wanted to show you what I did. So I mixed 2 small parts of red and 1 small part of blue, and then it ended up making it a little bit too blue. So then I added a little bit more red to it, and then it made it too red. And then I added a tiny bit more blue, and then I felt like that was more of the violet that I was looking for, or that very purple looking color. So you don't want it to be too blue or too red. Make sure it's right in between blue and red. All right, and then don't forget to go back and paint your red circle red and your blue circle blue. And then I'll go ahead. So yellow is going to be stronger than your red. I'm sorry. Yellow is going to be less dominant than red. So we need 2 spots of yellow with 1 spot of red. Or take your spot of red and then put twice as much yellow. All right, so you can use your bristles to mix. Another way that some people like to mix is with the handle end of their brush. The only thing is, when you do this, you've got to have like a paper towel or sponge or something nearby to clean your brush immediately as soon as you're done mixing, because if you don't, it's people get it in their hair, people get it on their clothes because they forget that that paint is on there. So do make sure that if you do use the handle end of your brush, that you do use something to clean it off immediately. Don't leave that paint on there. All right, I'm pretty happy with the way that that orange looks. I don't feel like it's too red or too yellow, so just make sure it's not too red or too yellow.
Intermediate or tertiary colors. If you've taken a previous art class, I've noticed that a lot of middle school teachers teach these as tertiary. I learned them as intermediate, and so I do use both, but I mostly say intermediate. And this is when you take one primary color and one secondary color and mix them together. And these are colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. These are not opposite colors. So for example, yellow and green make yellow green. YO stands for yellow orange. BG is blue green. BV is blue violet. Red O is red orange. And RV is red violet. And you only need to write what is underlined here. And we're not going to mix these to make them yet. We will later, but we're not going to right now. I just want you to know what their name is
what they are, and then which hues are intermediate. Now we're going to get into what's called color schemes, and these are sets of colors. And the first one that we're going to learn about is complementary color schemes. These are some of my favorite color schemes. These are opposite colors on the color wheel. These sets of colors are high in contrast when used together, and they have a vibrant and bold feeling when used side by side. There are so many sports teams that use these colors together in their color scheme because of what they look like when they're used together. They both stand out equally. There's not one color that is more powerful than another color. So, for example, red and green are complementary. So that means red and green are opposite of each other on the color wheel. Blue and orange are opposite of each other on the color wheel. And yellow and violet are opposite of each other on the color wheel. So lots of schools use complementary colors because the two colors, when used together, create a really bold and vibrant feeling, which kind of is supposed to help intimidate the other team. All right, when we're talking about complementary colors in artworks, an artist would want to use complementary colors for their artwork when they want to make a statement. You want to be noticed, you want it to be bright and vibrant, and you want it to catch the viewer's eye. That is when you would want to use a complementary color scheme. If you want to give it that excited feeling about your artwork, or if you want to give a fun vibe about your artwork, you would want to use complementary colors. So on your painting, I'm not going to demonstrate anything because we've already made these colors. These were the secondary colors. And I just want you to draw the chart exactly the way you see it. So draw a red circle, draw an arrow, and then make the arrow point to a green circle and use the green paint from your palette that you just created. Same thing with the blue, draw and paint a blue circle, draw an arrow directly across from it, and then in that circle, use your orange paint to fill it in. And then same thing with the yellow circle, draw an arrow, and then paint a violet circle using the violet paint that you already used from the secondary painting chart.